part 3 of my series on media bias against Muslims. So this I'm going to start. So this is under the Wikipedia article, Rape in Islamic Law. So it covers financial compensation to rape victims, and this is a problematic sentence. I could do a whole dive on this, but I just want to hit a few different options. The goal of the series is basically to show people that it's actually the media, a lot of biases and misinformation campaigns specifically targeting Muslims that tries to portray us as negative of a light as possible. So these jurists saw the free woman and her proprietorship over her own sexuality as not unlike the slave owner who owns the sexuality of his female slave. Okay. Um, so basically, a free woman is entitled to compensation if she's sexually assaulted, um, in the same way that a slave owner would be entitled to compensation if their slave was sexually assaulted. Now, rape in Islam is actually punished quite harshly. It's usually punishable by death or as a minimum castration for the rapist. So I really hate this false assumption that Islam is more tolerant of rape. Now, specifically, the slave owner owns the sexuality of his female slave. That's where I want to focus. I've actually written a huge write-up on refuting or rebuttal of slavery in Islam, where I was addressing a lot of misconceptions. The Muslim version of slavery is nothing like the disgusting Western version of slavery. That's also why you see a lot of black people reverting to Islam, because it treated them a lot better and had a lot of rights. If you would like to see that video, just please shoot me a message or a comment, and I will be glad to share that write-up. So I'm just going to lightly address this issue before moving to the next one. So this is a hadith. You can find it on sunnah.com and at the top here. So, and this is also it over here. And this is on the punishment for violence against a slave. Do you know it's forbidden to strike the face? It's actually striking a slave in general. He said, "You will see I was the seventh one among my brothers during the lifetime of Allah's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and we had only but one servant. One of us got enraged and slapped him. Thereupon Allah's Messenger commanded us to set him free." So if you're slapping a slave, the slave is automatically liberated. Now, here's another video. Another Sahih Hadith. So this is Sahih Muslim 1658b. You can search for it up here too. So a person got angry and slapped his slave girl. "You could find no other part to slap but the prominent part of her face. See, I was one of the 7 sons of Mukarran, and we had but only one slave girl. The youngest of us slapped her, and Allah's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam commanded us to set her free." So what is this saying? Is even if a child, like if you have a child and he hits your slave, the slave is instantly free. So now obviously rape would involve some sort of a violence. So if you're not even allowed to slap a slave, it's unfathomable that you would be allowed to sexually assault them. Now, here's another hadith. This one is specifically because a lot of people, and I think on that article, this one here, they imply it. They assume that marital rape is allowed in Islam, and that couldn't be further from the truth. So this is Sahih Muslim 1436d. And so reported Allah's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam as saying, "When a man invites his wife to his bed and she does not come, and he, the husband, spends the night," this is a typo on sunnah.com, "being angry with her, the angels curse her until morning." So this actual hadith has been falsely used to imply that Islam allows rape. I'm going to do a little bit of a deeper dive into this one specifically. So first of all, why is the husband spending the night angry? Because she didn't come. So automatically you know there that it's not allowed to be forced. Second of all, it says It doesn't say that she gets bad deeds or sayyi'at is what they're called in Islam. So she's not being punished by God for refusing to share her husband's bed. Just the angels curse her. Now, if you want to know why the angels curse her, it's because not pleasuring your spouse, whether you're male or female in Islam, because sex is considered a valid human and marital need and a marital duty on both sides. They curse her because she's bringing harm and destruction to herself. Because if you're not satisfying your partner, uh, they're more likely to commit adultery. They're more likely to resent you especially if you use sex as a weapon. You can start to have a lot of friction in a marriage, in a relationship, and people break up. If the husband commits adultery, now that's a crime punishable by death. He might father an illegitimate child, which is harmful to the child's mother, the wife, and the husband. And just divorce overall is pretty harmful to society. But it's clear that it does not allow sexuality to be taken from a woman anywhere. And hadith are very specific. There's a hadith about I forget who reported it, that they saw the Prophet eating a chicken, like sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That is how specific. Like, things aren't not mentioned, and that's the thing, is people approach Islam in a really negative lens, and I'm going to continue this. But yeah, so rape of slaves is not allowed, but Wikipedia would lead you to understand otherwise. And like I said, the concept of slavery, if you want my full write-up, I'll be more than happy to provide it. Now, on the next topic, so this is something that's rarely, if ever, talked about. Initially, when I first made my list on how to do this, because this is a video series I'd wanted to make for a long time, but I was not useful at video editing, and so I couldn't figure out. So I'm glad to see that Google and Wikipedia have improved a little bit, but it's still quite biased, and I'm going to show you. So the genocide of Mount Lebanon ended up in the death of about half of the population of Mount Lebanon. This was a atrocity committed in World War One. 200,000 people perished. Most people aren't familiar with it. So Wikipedia used to put the blame entirely on the Ottomans. It's since been adjusted a little bit, but there's still signs of the bias, and I'll show you. So, we'll scroll down a little bit. What happened at Mount Lebanon? So you're going to notice it starts at additionally. Why? Because, again, Google's skipping the part where the British and the French are responsible, and starts at the area where it makes the Ottomans look bad. So swarm of locusts devoured the remaining crops. That's true, creating a famine that led to the deaths of about half the population of Mount Lebanon. It played a role, but the primary role was actually the Allied blockade. And I'll show you that in a second. And it was a subdivision of the Ottoman Empire and the precursor of modern Lebanon. So, so far here you see locusts, and it was under Ottoman rule, so the Ottomans probably are responsible. It's always subtle like this. And I have a lot. And then you have different articles. The Armenian Genocide, Maronite Starvation. So I've picked several of my first Google results. The BBC article is actually not that bad. Let me see if this is the same. Sorry. Oh yeah, I watched the video. The video was actually not too bad. So BBC was a bit more reasonable. There was an old Wikipedia link from the BBC that was trying to blame it on the Ottomans, but that seems to have changed. So the Great Famine of Mount Lebanon, I'm not going to read all of it because you guys can. So like I said, killed 200,000 people. Was caused by the Allied forces blockading the Eastern Mediterranean, as they did with the German Empire and Austro-Hungary in Europe, in order to strangle the economy and weaken the Ottoman war effort. The situation was exacerbated by Jamal Pasha in Turkish, I guess. Arabs don't have the letter P. Commander of the 4th Army of the Ottoman Empire, who deliberately barred crops from neighboring Syria from entering Mount Lebanon. See, this makes it sound like he was just trying to aggravate the genocide. That is blatantly false. What was happening is World War II was happening. The Ottomans were getting hammered quite hard. And World War I, if I'm not mistaken, is where the Ottomans lost most of their empire. The Ottoman Sultan, who was the real caliph, did not want to participate in World War One. He was overthrown by secularists that are praised by the West, and they're the ones who went into World War One, and they're the ones who committed some atrocities. But this is an atrocity that was actually falsely blamed on the Ottomans. The secularist coup happened in 1909, so the Sultan was no longer in control. And then additionally, a swarm of locusts devoured the remaining crops. So, creating a famine that led to the death of half the population of Mount Lebanon. So, a few things to show that this is really a ridiculous claim. The genocide would have never happened if the Allies didn't blockade the Eastern Mediterranean. Okay? So, the idea that it's Jamal Pasha is a little bit crazy. And then he didn't deliberately bar it because he was trying to make the famine worse. What was happening is they were at war, they were being blockaded in a lot of places, and so food and equipment was prioritized to the military. It's tragic, but it was looking quite clearly to the Ottomans that they would lose Mount Lebanon. And then, the swarm of locusts was an additional. But it's like, well, if there was no blockade and there was no swarm, there wouldn't be a famine. But let's try to, make the Ottomans sound as bad as possible. I'm going to see here. See? So here we are. So to counter the Allied blockade, the Ottoman adopted a severe policy of acquisition by which all food supplies were prioritized to the family. So what does that mean? They're trying to get food to prioritize to the army, because the army is starving. And, obviously civilians are very important, but if you can't fight to defend those civilians, they're going to get massacred and genocided even worse. And so, yeah, you can read this whole article, but I just want to show the biased tint/slide. So I'm just going to check. Okay. World War One and the French Mandate. Here's an article, History of Lebanon under Ottoman Rule. Again, so they fix it in some areas, but they continue with the lies and propagation. The outbreak of World War I in August 1914 brought famine to Lebanon, mainly resulting from a Turkish land blockade and confiscation. This is again a pure fabrication, a pure Western lie to slander Muslims, one, and two, to cover up the atrocities that the French and the British committed to the population of Lebanon. And all you need to do, sorry, my blood boils at this, is look up how many places the British and French genocided after the fall of the empire. It's absolutely disgusting. And honestly, famine is the weapon of choice of the English. I'll get to that in a minute. And so it killed an estimated third to a half of the population of Lebanon. So again, remember, this article, blatantly false. Because then again, if the Ottomans were genociding people in Lebanon, why did they never do it except for when the British caused the blockade? Another article. So this is from the Washington Institute. The Armenian Genocide, Maronite Starvation, and Lessons from Atrocities in the Past. So it goes on about the Armenian Genocide. I'm just trying to get to blockade. So the most devastated measure taken against the Maronites was Jamal Pasha's blockade of Mount Lebanon. Early in the war, Jamal Pasha cordoned off Mount Lebanon from the Bekaa Valley, the breadbasket of Lebanon. His blockade was a response to the Untitled blockade, blah, blah, blah. So again, who's the most devastating person? Jamal Pasha. So it wasn't the Allies, right? This is the Washington Institute. Further spreading lies, blaming Muslims for genocide in their territories that were caused by the Allies. And if you read up on Allied history, you'd realize the Allies genocided tons of people in all their territories. It's quite problematic. I mean, you could make a shorter list of people that the British didn't genocide than you could of the people that they did. Honestly, I don't even know if you could come up with anybody that the British didn't genocide. The deployment of Ottoman troops exasperated the food shortage and disrupted individual and communal attempts to smuggle food into Mount Lebanon. So again, the Ottoman military was hungry, and it's tragic. And then, so here's 916.com. This is a really famous Lebanese website. and it's obviously pretty biased. So how the Ottomans forced half the Lebanese population to starve to death, again, not true. I don't blame her. In Lebanese curriculum, they tend to portray Ottomans quite negatively because Lebanon was colonized by France, and so a lot of the crimes that the French committed, the French like to put it on someone else. Now, she says Lebanese history books don't teach that. My experience was a little bit different from what I've seen. So the Ottoman Empire should be cleaned up of the Armenians and Lebanese. I don't know if this quote is true for Enver Pasha, but Enver was one of the secularists involved in the coup that overthrew the Muslims. So I don't really care what he had to say on the topic. He was not indicative of the empire because he helped overthrow the empire. And so, aside from the casualties brought by Miller, Lebanon lost over. Absolutely true. Unlike what Lebanese history textbooks teach, again, not my experience, not what I've read. The Great Famine of Mount Lebanon was not simply an innocent coincidence of unfortunate events. 100%, it was caused by the British, French, and then exacerbated by the Logos. True, Lebanon was an unintended victim of the Allies' blockade of the Eastern Mediterranean, which attempted to bring down the Ottoman Empire. That's a complete fabrication. It wasn't an unintended victim. They deliberately targeted Mount Lebanon as well as other places. And then you can read this article. I'm just trying to keep this a little bit to the point. So you can, I don't know if this is legible on your computer screen, but you can search it based on the title. I don't agree with anything in this article. National news. This is, again, so these are all a list of some of the top articles that show up when you Google Genocide Mount Lebanon. So the Great Famine, long before blah, blah, blah. Sorry, just one second. All right. So you can read this poem. This is the section I want to show. For over 3 months, the tiny but insatiable creatures devoured. So this is about the locals. Whatever had been left behind by the Ottoman authorities, who had prioritized food and grain reserves to feed their soldiers as part of the imperial war effort. Now, again, like if you watched my video on Eric Garner's murder, you'll see how they can use language to mislead you into believing a false narrative without necessarily lying. How do you skip the blockade, right? It's very, very deliberate. I'm sorry, it makes my blood boil because it's a whitewashing of a genocide. And so, and it's one that hits quite close to home. It was not, again, the Ottoman authorities. It was the Allies had blockaded, so there was a shortage, and the Ottoman authorities prioritized their military. List of massacres in Lebanon. So this is another list. Again, like, because I've had people lie on my previous video and say it's a coincidence, and I'm going to keep going through these and show you how many quote-unquote coincidences always come against Muslims or Arabs or covering up the massacre of Muslims and Arabs. So if we look at this list, right, what is missing? The genocide of Mount Lebanon. So we've got a massacre with 35 to 58 people killed, which, don't get me wrong, is tragic, but we just skipped 200,000 deaths. And, in Wiki's defense, it says this isn't a complete list, but like that's a pretty unacceptable thing to miss. Okay, so this is just a note I put for myself, so I'm not the best video editor. I want to show you this is a very common and very severe genocides that happened in Iran and around the same period, to show you that this is not a coincidence. This is the British's weapon of choice, and the Allies and even the Russians played a role in one of the two Iranian genocides. So the Persian famine, mass starvation and disease in Persia, Iran, under the rule of the Khanjar dynasty, again trying to shift the blame a little bit, took place in the territory from which, despite declaring neutrality, was occupied by the forces of the British, Russian, and Ottoman empires, whose occupation committed to the famine. So again, they're trying to make it seem like all these people played an equal role. Couldn't be further from the truth. Causes and contributing factors. Seasonal drought, of course, droughts make things worse. Muhammad Ghali Majd, which is the accurate view. The British occupation and its custom and finance regulations accounted for worsening the famine. Suggested snowfall, blah, 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 blah. Blames, Pat Walsh blames the British occupation and comments on claims of hoarding as causes of famine. British attitudes towards the starving Persians were uncannily similar to the expressed against the Irish in a similar position half a century before. So this one killed about 2 million, depending on your source, okay? And again, sorry, I'm just doing a quick check. So again, the British are killing a lot of people, right? This is again a coincidence. Just everywhere that the British happen to blockade, all these people die due to locusts and other unrelated reasons, and not by the very obvious things that the British were doing. Oh, sorry, this is the section I wanted to read. So the total granary was sold off to the British troops, which was really taken, and then the Russians blockaded all the roads and prohibited any transfer of grain except for their military. They're requesting a plaque for the British, and so they took their animals, their mules, their camels, left the country's transportation network in disarray, disrupted the distribution of foodstuff and other goods throughout the country with disastrous consequences. It costs more to transport grain than to grow it in many parts of Iran. All this made for the even more dreadful. So who caused it? The British and the Russians, right? This was at the same time as the Lebanese genocide, where 200,000 people died, and so you have 2 million or so. So it's been anywhere from yeah. So then here's World War II again. Period of mass starvation in Iran, trying to blame it on a dynasty or mentioning them. Occupied by, surprise, surprise, look at this. What a common theme. The United Kingdom and Soviet Union, despite being neutral. The Allies took control of the Iranian oil network, contracted half of Iran's public and public trade funds, and took 75% of the country's food distribution in the middle of a harvest. And so I'm not going to get into it too much other than the death toll. So we've got, anywhere from 15 million to 10 to 12 million. What I'd seen in the past is even 4.5 million. But so now we know, so say 3 to 4 million over here. So now we've got about 6.5 million Iranians killed by British famines. On top of that, let's not forget who else the British, because it really is their weapon of choice, right? The British killed 1 million Irish people. They killed about 300,000 Greeks in World War II by famine. And if you count all the famines that they did in India, the cumulative total, from the figures I've seen, are over 30 million Indians. And then it's really funny and such a crazy coincidence how the famines in India stopped as soon as the British left. So here's another example, and then that'll be it for this video. So the Adana Massacre. So this is a legitimate massacre that happened, but I'm going to show you how they, again, try to blame Muslims for things Muslims didn't do. So Adana Massacre happened in the Ottoman Empire. That's true. A massacre of Armenian Christians by Ottoman Muslims. That part's not true at all. Amidst the Ottoman counter coup of 1909. So what happened in 1909 was the Young Turks overthrew the Ottoman Sultan, and the secularists were in charge of the Ottoman Empire. Let me see. Look at that. 1908, the Young Turk government came into power in a bloodless revolution. Look up the Young Turks for yourself, okay? I can make a video about them later, but they weren't Ottomans, they were secularists. They hated the Ottomans, and these are the same secularists that the West loves to celebrate with Turkish history, and they include, Ataturk. And they're portrayed in a positive light when they're the ones that did all these atrocities. Now, you can make a claim that some of the conflict between the Armenians is a lot more complicated than it's portrayed, but for the purpose of this video, I just want to show, and like, again, I'm not a fan of the secularists at all. I actually hate them. And so it would be in my best interest to portray it as just pure evil. If you want, I can do a deep dive on that. But again, so the Young Turks, and they dismissed the Sultan, right? Abdul Hamid. He was overthrown by the Young Turks. And yeah, so there's more examples of falsely and negatively portraying Muslims as committing a lot of pretty heinous acts, right? And so this is what I want everybody to be aware of. If you're Muslim, share this with people. You know, people aren't aware of this. Share it amongst ourselves, because I see Muslims starting to believe anti-Muslim lies. We have a very rich history. We had 4 caliphates, and they were the biggest and empires on earth at the time, and they're the only ones not tarnished with a single genocide. I'll say that again. They're the only ones not tarnished with a single genocide. And you know, you pick any European country, and you have a list of genocides that almost never ends. And so we have a much richer history, especially we're the only large empires that have that clean reputation. And so it's important for us to share this information with our, you know, fellow Muslims, brothers and sisters, as well as non-Muslims, because, you know, people are starting to get this very false narrative about Muslims being evil, Muslims doing horrible things, and it's quite far from the truth. Our religion's quite beautiful, and it bans things like that. Thank you for your time. Have a great day. Oh, thank you. I saw my first chat comment while I'm streaming. So usually I'm high alternative view. Yeah, usually I I don't know how to upload videos properly, and so I stream it not expecting it to really be a stream, and then I upload it. But I'm very glad you were there. I was looking at the other screen, so I didn't see your comment till now. I hope you're still around. Thank you for attending. So what I'll do, if you're still here, if you can type something, I'm going to end the stream here. Oh, actually, you know what? I'll keep it. Is there anything you want me to cover? And then I'll just upload this section as a video later as a highlight.